we're good to go, Emily?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. We're super excited for you to have you join us on this really important webinar topic. I know it's been a little bit of a rocky road during, of course, during the whole COVID epidemic, but really getting our kids to kind of get re-engaged here after quite a year that they've had. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. We'll be here from about 11:30 to 1 o'clock. In a minute, I'll kind of lay out the format for today and introduce you to our speakers. My name is Andrea Philleo, and I am the founder and the executive director of the Colorado Wellness Center for Girls. We are a very wellness-based, holistic, full-day program for adolescent girls that are struggling with depression, anxiety, self-harm, falling behind in school, really struggling with the everyday challenges of adolescence. I'm hoping really to be a resource for you as well in the community. It's really difficult and challenging to navigate our mental health system, especially when we have a kiddo that's struggling. It can become very complicated. It can be very stressful to provide the right kind of care and find the right type of therapist and type of care for your kiddo. So if ever the need comes about where we need to navigate the mental health system in terms of adolescent girls in the community, the Colorado Wellness Center for Girls is always a resource for you to be able to do that as well. So I just wanted to give some kind of logistical overviews about today. This entire session will be recorded. So if you feel as if you miss anything or there was an important point that you forgot to write down or didn't have time to write down, no worries. We will be sending you a recorded version as well as some notes that are taken by Emily here during the session. And then of course, we'll have the transcript posted on our website as well, if you ever need to share it or feel as if somebody else in the community may be able to benefit. So it will be recorded and you will have access to it on an ongoing basis. If you do have questions and concerns, feel free to use the chat. I will be moving from our guest speakers today, but if you have a question that comes up specifically when one of our speakers is talking, please feel free to put it in the chat and I will have Emily kind of flag me to be able to ask that question to our speaker as well. So I'm really honored and grateful to present this webinar today. We've got really three phenomenal speakers that are very well respected by me and I know in our community. So first, I just want to acknowledge Emily, if you could just give us a wave here. I'm not sure exactly what she does behind the scenes. All I know is that I'm really glad that it happens because she's amazing at it. She will help navigate us through the next hour and a half and be able to send out those recorded versions as well. So Emily, thank you so much for your help and thank you for navigating that chat box as well. Our first speaker for today is Maria. Maria, if you could just kind of give a wave and do a brief introduction of yourself, that would be much appreciated.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And my name is Maria and I am a licensed mental health professional and I work with children and families, and I'm especially interested in supporting helpers like who we're talking with today to support children from infancy through adolescence. And I'm going to provide some tools today to help us with our anxieties as we help our kids with our anxieties. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria. Our second speaker today is Abigail Mclaughlin. Abigail, if you could kind of give a brief overview of who you are, that would be great as well.
Hi, I'm Abigail. I'm a senior at South High School. I've personally dealt with lots of different mental health issues and getting back into the world as a high school student, so I'm happy to provide any insight there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm super curious, as always, to hear from the child's perspective as well. I'm really honored and grateful to introduce Rachelle Nuvonner. She is our new clinical director here at the Colorado Wellness Center. She just started with us a couple of weeks ago. So she has courageously accepted my invitation to sit in on this webinar today, and I am also grateful for that. So if Richele, if you could do a brief introduction of yourself as well, that would be great.
I feel like you did it for me, Andrea. I'm Rachelle Nuvonner. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I'm currently newly the clinical director here at the Colorado Wellness Center for Girls.
Thank you. Emily, anything else you think we need to cover before I go into kind of a brief introduction of what we'll be talking about today?
No, I think that's it. After the webinar, we will email out the recording as well. So you'll have access to all of, and any of the materials that are shared as resources will also be emailed out.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So one of the big topics that I wanted to talk about today is parent care. And Maria's going to be speaking about this a little bit today, but when we have a child that is struggling, it can be a really difficult experience, both emotionally, psychologically, and physically. And when we have a kid who's in that state, of course, we as caretakers, whether we're parents, teachers, educators, therapists, anyone who has a vested interest in our kids, it is, of course, our intuitive nature to get very involved in the emotional experience of our kids and really to become desperate to help in any way that we can. And this, of course, is our job as adults. This is our role when we are involved in the lives of children to help in any way we can. Sometimes in my work at the center and just in my everyday life outside of the center, I notice a very important boundary that parents should be able to set with their kids. So there's a big difference between being emotionally invested in your child and trying to help them navigate the psychological and emotional world that they live in. And so we hopefully today will give you some great tools on how to do that. Sometimes what I often see is that a parent also becomes drowning, for a lack of a better word, with their child. And this is when a parent can become less helpful versus more helpful. So when a kid is drowning or a kid is overwhelmed or a kid has reached their capacity or doesn't have the coping skills and strategies to help resolve an unresolved problem, they need a parent, a teacher, a guardian, a therapist that can be resilient in the struggle. And it's not that we don't care, and it's not that we're not invested, and it's not that we are not trying everything that we can to help our child. But in doing that, at the same time, we also have to remain healthy and strong, because that's how they need us to show up. So if we are drowning with them, now we have two people drowning, and it becomes a pretty ineffective situation. So this is a really easy thing to do, to become really overwhelmed when we have a kid who is struggling. So I'd like to hit on today about what that looks like for you as a caretaker, whatever role that looks like, and what you can do to actually keep yourself emotionally regulated when you have a kid that is struggling. One of the biggest things that I hear from the girls at the center is that they don't want to overwhelm their parents. They sometimes feel like a burden. They feel guilty for feeling bad. And so that plays into the dynamic of a parent becoming less useful and a kid shutting down because they are scared to communicate, because they don't want to take you down with them. So this is a really important piece of information that I want everybody to know about it. And I think that we'll be able to hit on that today from everyone that's speaking, especially Maria and Richele. One of the biggest tools that I can also offer you, and this is just a brief introductory to this kind of collaborative problem-solving process, is the work of Ross Green. So he has an extraordinary website called livesinthebalance.org. And here at the Colorado Wellness Center for Girls this year, we've implemented much of his work on how we can work with kiddos in terms of helping them navigate their emotions and their feelings. And so this powerful dynamic gives the opportunity for us as caretakers to hear the concerns that our child is having, to get our concerns on the table in terms of how it's impacting their world and ours, and then do a collaborative problem-solving approach to help the kids navigate their fear. And one of the most important messages that Ross Green hits on that constantly, kind of is established in the back of my mind is that kids would do well if they could do well. And again, I'm going to repeat that. So kids would do well if they could do well. So no kid is wanting to struggle. No kid is deliberately putting themselves in a position of hurting, of not doing well. And so Ross Green really reframes this idea for us that kids are not unmotivated. They're not lazy. They're not manipulative. In fact, it's just the opposite. And I would like to reframe about how we think about kids that are struggling in that they're stuck. And it's our job as adults, in no matter what capacity we show up, to help our kids get unstuck. And so we'll be talking a lot about that today, but two of the things that Ross Green really hits on, and in terms of getting our kids unstuck, is helping them resolve an unresolved problem and helping them working on a skill that's lagging. So that is where the struggle is. It's unresolved problems and lagging skills. And it's our role as adults to help resolve these problems for our kids and offer them the skill set so the lagging skills get minimized. And I think that's really an important thing that I carry around personally and professionally, is that kids would do well if they could do well. The last thing I'm going to say before I hand it over to Maria is some really important messaging that I always keep in the back of my mind when it comes to adolescents and what they need. So here are the main messages that, in my experience, that teenagers have been trying to convey to us adults generation after generation. I need to belong. I want independence. I want to take risks. I'm trying to figure out who I am. I'm going to challenge my parents and other authority. I want to challenge status quo. I'm avoiding something. I'm scared. I'm hurting. I'm suffering, or I'm overwhelmed. And so when we're trying to navigate a kid, my suggestion is that we not just look at the behavior of the child, but we look at the underlying need that our kids are trying to convey. And so there's a really important quote that goes along with this, and I'm going to have Emily put this into the chat as I'm reading it. And the quote goes something like this: beneath every behavior is a feeling, and beneath every feeling is a need. And when we meet that need, rather than focusing on the behavior, we begin to deal with the cause of the problem and not the symptom. So this is really strikes home to me, because a lot of the time we are naturally and instinctively driven to the behavior at hand and trying to change that behavior. And what I'm suggesting to you is that if we can get to the need and we can get to the unresolved problem and lagging skill, we will organically and by default help the behavior at hand. So with that, Maria, I'm going to pass things off to you. It is about 11:47 right now. I'm going to be asking some lead questions to Maria based on her area of expertise. We'll hear from Maria until approximately 10 minutes after 12. Maria, I will let you know when that time is getting close. And as I'm looking at the list of questions, Maria, I struggle with where to begin because you've got so many great ideas here that I hope that we can get to them all in some way and capacity. But where I would like to begin with you is maybe grounding ourselves in our audience in a very brief meditation so we can focus on the here and now and only focus on the here and now, and maybe let go from some of the expectations for the rest of our day so we can really focus on getting the most out of the next hour and 15 minutes as possible.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes. I love everything that I've been hearing you say, and I want to add to that and in the time that we have allotted. But first, I want to bring us here to the here and now. So just take a deep breath with me, and I'm going to take us through a type of a grounding activity, and it's called how do you know, or how do you feel? So sometimes we know that there's a feeling, we have a feeling, but how do you know that you have this feeling? So however you're feeling right now, note it in your head. You might jot it down somewhere. However you might be feeling excited, tired, nervous, whatever you're feeling. So now, if you would, go ahead and get comfortable. And I'm going to do kind of like a body scan, starting from the head and moving the way down. And I'm going to ask you this question. Think of ways that your head might feel, ways that your head might be feeling now, or ways that your head might feel. And if you'd like, if it helps you, feel free to chat it in. So for example, my head might feel tired, or my head might feel full, or my head might feel busy. And they can be both physically or mentally, or my head might feel, calm and ready. So take a moment, and this is open to anyone, participant and speakers as well. Think of ways that your head might feel. Now think of ways that your neck might feel. And as you bring attention to your neck, I notice some of you are kind of relaxing your neck. So my neck might feel tight. It might feel sometimes when we talk too much, our throat hurts. Ways that your neck might feel. Okay, think of ways that your shoulders might feel. Your shoulders. Your shoulders might feel tight. They might feel strong. Think of how you're holding sometimes there's an emotional component. Sometimes we feel down and our shoulders go down. Sometimes we feel strong and our shoulders might go back. Think of the ways your arms might feel. And as you're noticing, as we're scanning down, how do you know how you're feeling right now? So you might be feeling tired or excited or nervous. And where is it in your body? Sometimes it's in our shoulders, think of ways your arms might feel, and I'll continue scanning down. And take this opportunity. You can also stretch your arms, whatever feels more like we're bringing attention to that part of the body as we're talking about it. A couple more. Think of the ways your back might feel. Think of how your back feels now, or how it could feel or might feel. And the way that your chest and stomach might feel. Take the opportunity to take a breath. And finally, think of the ways that your legs and feet might feel. I'm going to wiggle my toes. I know for me, nervousness I feel in my legs and different parts of my body. So this short activity and body scan helps you to connect to yourself. And that's one of the things that when you're talking, Andrea, about people being drowning, and also I call it flooded. Sometimes we just get flooded, and we can get flooded and then we can come back to ourselves. And it's when we're having a crisis situation, it is like waves. We get flooded and then come back to ourselves. So these are ways to connect to ourselves emotionally, mentally, and then don't forget the physical. But one way to connect, and I can bring it into our first point, but I was going to talk about connecting to our kiddos. And Andrea, yeah, do you want to bring it in? Okay.
Okay, 2021, I'm still muted. So yeah, Maria, I think that's great. I think one of the things that I'd really like to hit on is, how we can take care of ourselves as parents before we take care of our kids. And I know that we've heard this a million times, but I'm wondering if you can begin by speaking about, in your work, what are some of the things in terms of the values that kids are needing right now, and how parents can help understand those values with their children, and also perhaps tie that into the nervous system and how they can show up from a physiological standpoint with their children.
Yeah, that's great. So we want to show up physiologically. So definitely connecting to ourselves, even when we flood and disconnect, and then connecting to our child. I want to bring in a very important piece, which is called positive intent. And I just did a little like you wanted. So I wrote here connection and you wanted. So this is a way to start talking to our kids where, hey, you wanted to sleep longer. You wanted to talk to your friends for a while. You wanted to watch more TV. And so we're connecting to them about what their values might be. So as opposed to what our values might be. So we might say, okay, you wanted more time on your phone. When you want to be on your phone, you can hop back on today after your homework or tomorrow morning. So we want to frame things where we're taking into account who they are, because like you said, teens are trying to figure out who they are. And another thing we can do is we can invite them to depend on us. Does that make sense? We want to invite them to, we want to say, I got that for you. So I have a preteen, I have an 11-year-old son who started a new school in this reentry that we're all in. And his backpack is really big and heavy. So as we're carrying it out to the car, I usually say, oh, I got that for you. And I'll carry it for him to the car and help him get in, and oh, there you are, and set it down for him. So when our child says, oh, mom, can you get me some water? Taking an opportunity like, yeah, I'll grab that for you. And knowing that they can lean into us a little bit in those small ways. And other ways that we can invite them to depend on us is to get super organized. So we want to have monthly calendars, daily and weekly calendars, and whiteboards that we can include like meal plans that say, okay, here's what the week looks like. Because as we get flooded and they get flooded, which is happening a lot these days to everyone, I think, children forget that things have a beginning and an end. So soccer practice might be on Tuesdays, and they might think, oh, I don't want to do soccer, but you can show on the calendar, it's this Tuesday, this Tuesday, this Tuesday, it's off, so that they can have some context and framework for what's happening. This is another way that maybe our adolescents and tweens and teens, maybe they were more organized before pandemic, but they need us to come back in and help them get organized. And this is where you can ask, like you say with the collaborative problem solving, what would help you get out the door in the morning? And then make a plan with them. But very, very important that it is in a visual form. So it needs to be written down somewhere, because in my work, what I understand is that the brainstem needs a visual, and we're moved by our brainstem and by our limbic system to then get motivated and get into our executive skills. So I do have a visual, Emily, that has the executive skills, and this is one, if you want to pop it on, that's cool. I'll start talking about it while you do that. So all of us, what gets us moving and going is the executive skills. And so our kiddos are still working on the access to their executive skills. And so here it has the executive skill lending library. So this has 11 executive skills listed. So there you can see attention, time management, organization, prioritization, flexibility, empathy, metacognition, and we can go, yeah, however it works. Prioritization, working memory, impulse control, and emotional regulation, task initiation, goal persistence, and achievement. And so these are the 11 skills. So this is something that will be sent to you, that's available to you, but you can see maybe with task initiation, we can see it's help the child choose options. So you might say, you know, would you like to go to the school, you know, by bus or walking today? Or verbalizing the beginning of something. And for teens, ask what might be your first step. So here we have lots of examples, and then also teens are included in the bottom. Goal persistence, encouraging steps towards a goal. So this is the same as above, and make visual charts to show progress and celebrate goals. So our kiddos need us to really help them with their emotional and with their executive skill functioning right now, and understanding that it takes 20 some years for executive skills to fully develop. And so we can lend them to our young children and teens alike at this point. And they'll be ready for this kind of problem solving and help if we are taking care of ourselves as well. So we can show the nervous system too. And as Emily is getting that up, nervous system is the basis of self-care. So in our first activity of how your head might feel, your neck might feel, these are symptoms. It's like the quote that I'm reading, beneath every behavior is a feeling, and beneath every feeling is a need. And when we meet the need rather than focus on behavior, we begin to deal with the cause and not the symptoms. So I'm going to use this is the same word, it has the same, I think we're talking about the same thing here. This is the type of play therapy that I do. It's nervous system symptoms of regulation and dysregulation. So a symptom is something that you can notice outwardly. So you might notice it in your kids or notice it in yourself. So you can outwardly notice some of these things. So this is about that all symptoms of dysregulation arise out of the perceptions of events in our lives. And it says when we change our perceptions, we change the symptoms in our nervous system. It's wise to master the art of how to change our perceptions and how to manage the symptoms that arise in our bodies to help return us to a more regulated / ventral state. So this was created by Synergetic Play Therapy. And the creator's named Lisa Dion, and she puts this out for us. And this is a main framework that I use in my therapy with families, parents, and children as we look to see where we are in our regulation or dysregulation. So this is 3 branches of the nervous system. So way over on the left, you have the sympathetic response, which is freeze, flight, fight, hyperarousal symptoms when there are perceptions of threat or challenge.
Maria, I think you might have froze. Oh, you're back.
Okay. So I was just reading on the left-hand column. Thank you. And anxious, excessive motoric activity. Other symptoms over here are overwhelmed, disorganized, highly irritable, uncontrollable bouts of rage, aggressive, and at its extreme dissociation. And so that's so funny when you said, oh, I think you may have froze. I started to feel very panicky and very anxious, and my head started going boom, 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 boom. So I noticed my symptom over here on the left column, and so it works like a seesaw. So we might also be having way over on the right-hand side, the parasympathetic dorsal vagal response, which is the opposite, collapse, immobilization, hypoarousal symptoms. Also when there's perceptions of threat or challenge. And what this looks like is helplessness, appearing lifeless, non-expressive, numbing, lack of motivation, lethargic and tired. So we can see that lack of motivation is something that we're talking about today. Dulled capacity to feel significant events, emotional constriction, depression, isolation, and at its extreme, dissociation. So what we want to look is we want to become aware of ourselves as we're in these dysregulated states so that we can then take an action that can help us come more into the central column. And then again, we go out. So the goal is not necessarily calm. The goal is to figure out where we are and do something to move ourselves back. And so the central column is called the parasympathetic / ventral vagal response, regulated symptoms, mindful / attached to self. So this is when there's a neuroception of safety. And that looks like think logically and clearly, able to make conscious choices, able to make eye contact. So if you're your teen is not willing to make eye contact at the moment, just breathe and relax until they're able to make eye contact in a natural way. Display a wide range of emotional expression, feeling grounded, able to notice breath, poised, internal awareness of both mind and body in the body, and able to communicate verbally in a clear manner. So this neuroception of safety for kids looks like an adult that is also connected to their own physical and mental and emotional symptoms and awareness. And then things like when I recommend calendars and schedules, it's not just to get something done or for a checklist. It's because a scheduled, not scheduled, but like a little bit more organization on the outside helps orient people and gives a neuroception of safety. So that's a big piece about the organization, the getting organized and providing with kiddos with what's the meals this week and what do you need to get ready for soccer tomorrow, and helping them get on the organized level, not for organization itself, but for the fact that it can bring much more neuroception of safety. And sometimes we're dealing with kiddos that are depressed or anxious on either side. One of the things we can do is bring a little bit more organization. So if you want to show the second page, please, Emily, these are, this is from Synergetic Play Therapy regulation activities. So listed below are just some examples of activities that can be used to help regulate a dysregulated nervous system. It is wise to do these activities proactively as well as in moments of dysregulation. It can also, it's also important to follow the body's innate wisdom back to a regulated / ventral state. So these activities are important to be done alone and with someone. So you can print this when you get this resource and put it on your fridge and notice in yourself, oh, I was stuck in traffic. I feel highly irritable. I think I'm going to get drink some ice water. Sometimes kids just naturally like to hang up upside down off a couch or bed, dancing, massages, bouncing, and different things like this. So looking at this, I like to look at this thinking about children, but also thinking about ourselves. So the more we get to know ourselves and the more we use this as an example, it's kind of like how we teach our kiddos to pour a glass of milk, or we might teach them to drive. We can teach them also how to manage their nervous system. And the last piece is the talking about aggression and anxiety. And I want to give 3 tips for dealing with frustration, if it's okay to switch over to that. And I don't have a visual for that, Emily, but but understanding that a lot of what we're seeing today, a lot of what I'm seeing in my work and that I'm noticing just chatting with friends and colleagues, sometimes it looks like aggression or anxiety on the outside, but at the root of it, according to the work of Dr. Gordon Neufeld, is frustration. And frustration simply means something isn't working. So when something isn't working, frustration moves the system to either try to change it. It has 3 things it tries to do. It either tries to change it, and if it can't, it tries to change itself, like we try to adapt to it. But if we can't adapt to it at the moment, then it can come out as aggression towards self or others. So we want to treat frustration at the root, which is an energy in the body. So one of the things that can help, and it's three really fun recommendations of ways to help flush out frustration regularly, according to Dr. Neufeld. And there's an article that's going to go out in the follow-up material written by a colleague of mine named Lisa Weiner. And she talks about how the 3 ways to help frustration to go is destructive play, creative play, and melancholy-inducing play. So destructive play can be like getting a can smasher, taking some mugs from Goodwill outside and smashing those inside of a towel with a hammer, things that help the body move this energy out when things are not working. And I think this is really, really important right now. You can also at home with your kiddos make a book of like curse words or little things that are like really not, that are kind of taboo and not really allowed, but have fun with it and have a place for it to be. With middle schoolers, we like to do like Nerf gun battles. It's highly recommended, like go outside with your family and play Nerf guns and get a destructive play going. Creative play can be baking something that they know will turn out good, doing a puzzle or something that is easy for them to do, but starting first with destructive play, then creative play. And melancholy inducing play can be like watching a sad movie, or sometimes, we like to put on sad music, and allowing having a space for grief and sadness. And it doesn't have to be directly to what happened. It can be indirect. So something may be happening that we know is causing a lot of grief, but we could cry about something else. So it could be a sad book about someone else or a sad movie. So it's one step removed, makes it easier to let the tears flow. And my final point is, for all of this to happen, it's not just one piece. The child has to feel, the adolescent, the teen has to feel connected to the person, to a person who's helping them to regulate and organize. And so helping your teen identify who is their person, who is someone at school or at home that they can just call on, lean on, and someone that can help them get through this self-care and organization and nervous system regulation. Yeah, that's so. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Maria. That was really helpful. I wanted to ask one follow-up question, and I know that we only have a few minutes here before we switch over, but when we think about anxiety in kids, and a lot of this is the work of Lynn Lyons, who is an anxiety and OCD expert. When we talk about kids who have high anxiety, one of the most always underlying emotion that is associated with anxiety is fear. And, fear can hijack that brain from a physiological standpoint and send a panic into a kiddo that makes the anxiety even worse. So if you've got a kid that is anxious about going to school, or anxious about their friend group, or anxious about re-engaging in an extracurricular activity, and then that fear hijacks the brain, and then it sends a panic signal back to the brain that says, you can't do this, you should be afraid, you're not good enough, all these bad things are going to happen. Can you just talk just for a minute, and I know I'm condensing about 10,000 years worth of information in just a few minutes here, and I do recommend the work of Lynn Lyons to talk about how to work with anxiety with your kids. But can you talk a little bit about when that fear hijacks the brain and it triggers into anxiety, what some kids can do, maybe with the help and support of their parents, to rewire that a little bit?
You bet. So one of the things that I've learned from Dr. Gordon Neufeld is to also call that, to sort of rename it alarm. So it is fear, but we can also say alarm. So I feel alarmed, and we can feel socially alarmed or physically alarmed. And there's ways to play with it. One of the ways we play with alarm is Halloween. It's a way that we bring spookiness and fear into our every day. So naming it in ourselves and our kids. And then I can also send an article along about different ways to soothe that alarm play. I know this seems more relevant to younger children, but like peekaboo, hide and seek, those are things that help the child to experience controllable levels of alarm in the context of a positive relationship. So calling it, so we might say alarm, and I'll send some things along to help with,
Yeah, thank you. Yep. And I know the best way to work with that anxiety is to step into these fearful experiences. So, anxiety loves avoidance, anxiety loves accommodation. And so the way to rewire that brain to send a different signal that you can do this, we can step into this fear with some good coping strategies, is, exposure therapy, is to actually have the kiddo step into these scary, or what seemingly seem like scary experiences, because there's been a false narrative about that fear.
Yes. And I'll add another thing is that the fear doesn't have to go away, but we can add something, which is figure out something that's a high value to them, because we'll do things that are scary to us if there's something at the end that we highly value.
Right.
So figure out not a reward, for example, but rather framing it in a way like, oh, it's really important to you to do X, Y, Z. Okay, this is one way to get it. So that might encourage some courage.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have worked at the center about kiddos that, for example, want to be with the other girls, and they're very social, and they value and they love, socializing, and then they have a fear of something that prohibits them from doing what they want to do. It stops them from being social. It stops them from experiencing a group activity, let's say, for example. So holding on to something like, hey, I know that you really like doing that, and fear is getting in the way of something that you value, and talking back to the fear and saying something along the lines of, hey, are you really going to let this bully of fear interfere with something that I know that you really want to do? And so I love that rewiring of the brain. So thank you, Maria. And if you can
Excellent.
send that article along in the chat, that would be
Yeah.
great. Thank
Okay,
you so
great.
much. If anybody has any follow-up questions for Maria, I will try and leave a few minutes at the end of our time today. But Abigail, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to you. I'm of course incredibly interested in your experience as a kid. It's so funny. Well, it's not funny, but there's a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of information out there, there's a lot of articles written by adults, whether they're therapists or whether they're parents or whether they're educators, on trying to help us manage this epidemic of depression and anxiety in kids and helping them get back on track. But oftentimes we don't ask the kids directly what works, what helps, what feels good, what feels right, what hasn't worked in the past. What has your experience been like? So I'm so glad that we have this opportunity to kind of ask you directly and get your perspective on it. And I appreciate you being vulnerable about this and honest with your emotions, as you always are. So the first question I'm going to ask, Abigail, is what has it been like for you as a high school student to kind of get back into the swing of things this year, given that, last year looked very different. This year you're back on ground in school. And what has that been like for you trying to navigate those challenges?
It's definitely had its challenges. I'm sorry, I have kind of a cold, so I'm gonna try to speak as well as I can. But I would say the most challenging part is that people, my peers, everyone, they don't acknowledge how challenging it is. And so we can't connect at that level. Like, I hadn't been back at school in almost 2 years, and neither had anyone else. And obviously, that's going to present its own challenges. That's going to be scary for everyone. But we all kind of pretend that everything's fine and like nothing's changed. And that's hard for everyone, especially kids with those underlying conditions like myself.
And so, Abigail, what have been some ways that have worked for you that has helped you cope with the anxiety, cope with the fear, cope with your own situation? If you could pass this off to another kid, what would you say that has been helpful or beneficial for you in navigating these waters?
I think you have to find a balance of being able to reflect internally with yourself, but then also not isolating an excessive amount. So setting aside time to either journal, draw, anything that helps you that you know works, and reflect internally, but then also make time to do the things that you love, whether that's being social or anything else.
For sure. Yeah. Everybody's got their strengths, and finding those strengths and figuring out what works for them is so important in terms of emotional regulation, self-soothing, and just having these coping strategies to be able to have a go-to activity that works. And so I love that. And I think that that's great. And that can be accessible to a kid at any time, any place, which is really great. In terms of kind of what you're hearing around the adolescent community, we know that we've got an epidemic of depression, anxiety on our hands. We've got kiddos that are cutting. We've got kiddos that are flooding the hospitals right now with a lot of mental health needs. In terms of kind of what you're hearing in the adolescent community, what is your take on kind of what's going on with kiddos your own age? And then the follow-up question is, what have you found most helpful in terms of the role as an adult, whether it's been a parent, a therapist, a teacher in your life that has helped kiddos kind of navigate these waters right now?
Well, kids don't really discuss their struggles with each other because they're not really willing to admit it to themselves. That's the first issue that I've picked up on. I think, unfortunately, it's not really taken seriously by kids, unless you've had that firsthand experience. I think as far as teachers and parents, you can't force a kid to open up if they're not willing to, but you always have to be willing to listen in case they are going to, because they will eventually.
And so have there been times when it's been hard for you to open up, or you know of someone that it's been hard to open up? What are some of, like, say, 3 tips that you could give to an adult? Because we know how important the connection is. And Maria just hit on the relationship and attachment. And so in leaning into your person. And so in order to become a person for a kid, what would you say are 3 ways that have been useful in your experience of what allows for connection in terms of you being able to open up to somebody?
I think finding shared experiences. I think if you want someone to be vulnerable with you, you also have to be vulnerable with them. That's one thing that I've found really helpful when connecting with people. I think you also, there has to be a level of respect, mutual respect. You have to respect the kid if you want them to respect and open up to you. And I mean, those are the 2 things that I found the most helpful. I'll try to think of a third in a minute, so I'll let you know, but
Okay, yeah, and if you can't, that's okay too. So we talked a little bit about some of your coping strategies and being able to kind of re-engage and work past fear and work through resistance. Tell me about, in your experience and kind of your struggles. We talk about depression and anxiety a lot right now. Adults are talking about it a lot right now. And so it's really interesting to me that we've never kind of asked kids directly about what helps and what works. Has there been specific experiences, whether they've been therapeutic or not, that you have found the most helpful in helping you kind of manage and get through?
um, I think experiences that are personal have helped me get through. They have to be experiences that you experience on your own. As you were bringing up earlier, like being a teenager is when you discover who you are, and having those illnesses like dealing with depression, anxiety, having that be an integral part of your growing up. Somehow you need to make the distinction between it shaping who you are and it becoming who you are. So having experiences where you're doing it on your own and you're surviving on your own and you're not relying on others, but those are the ones that I found the most therapeutic.
Good, awesome. Thank you for that. I think we may have several parents on this webinar right now. If you could flip your role right now and put yourself in the role of a parent, and you have a kid who's struggling. If you were to show up as a parent right now, and I know this is kind of a leap for you right now, but what are some things that have been helpful in terms of your parents or watching a parent navigate with their kid? I think we sometimes as parents feel helpless, we feel stuck, we feel scared, and we just are desperately trying to connect and help our kids. And so obviously parents have the most primary and chronic role there. So if you were to flip your roles for a minute, what do you think parents can do to help their kids right now?
Well, I think don't don't pretend like you're not afraid. That's one thing that I've dealt with my parents. I mean, I know when I was struggling and when I still do struggle, like it scares them. And admitting to the fear has helped both of us. So that's the biggest thing that I found is just it's okay to be afraid and feel alarmed, even as a parent and you're not going through it, but it's still scary to watch someone go through it.
Mhm, mhm. And so times that you have felt, Abigail, maybe shut down or resistant to connecting with your parents, in those times where your parents must have been feeling afraid and scared, what would you like to tell the parents on this webinar? If you could tell them when your kid is isolating or when your kid slams the door or when your kid says, I hate you, or when your kid says, there's nothing that you can do to help me, what would you say to the parents in terms of what that kid is thinking and maybe what that kid really needs in those moments?
It's not personal. That's the biggest thing. I mean, it has everything to do with the child and almost nothing to do with you. I mean, they're functioning from a place of fear and from a place of, I mean, yeah, from a place of fear. And I think a lot of the times parents try to fix things immediately instead of allowing the kid to feel and experience their own emotions. And you don't have to fix things right away. You can let the emotions sit before rushing in to save the day.
Yeah. So do you think, that out of parents' own fear that they rush to solve the problem because it's scary and uncomfortable for them to sit in the emotions that their kid is feeling? So maybe that's driving, missing the empathy step and missing the validation step and moving straight into problem solving. And I think that that brings up two things. Number one, we haven't validated our kids' experience, which takes away from the connection. And number two, if we're problem solving immediately, we don't give our kid the opportunity to collaboratively problem solve with us. And then we're depriving them really of a pretty essential skill.
Yeah.
Yeah. Abigail, is there anything else that you think is important to talk about in terms of helping these parents experience helping their kids, or what pieces of information you can give them about feelings that their own children may be having?
It's not unusual. I mean, it's obviously like a unique experience for everyone, but you're not alone, and this isn't the first time something like this has happened to someone.
Yeah. One of the things that I keep hearing a lot right now is this importance of parents really being able to find this delicate balance between stepping in, getting involved, drowning, flooding, as Maria said, and being able to own and hold their own personal health in check. And so this is so important because I think that sometimes as parents or adult caregivers, we feel if we take our foot off the pedal, if we don't connect with our kids constantly, then we're going to miss an opportunity. And really, I think what our kids may need, in addition to a lot of other things, is a role model of somebody that is able to hold this for us, take care of themselves, and be able to connect with us. And so this role of us as adults and it feels selfish sometimes to think of, how can I take care of myself when my kid is struggling? But it kind of backfires in that if we don't take care of ourselves as adults when we have a kid that's struggling, then we're not really of service to ourselves or to them. And so finding that balance of modeling to our children, I can handle this. I know what to do in terms of taking care of myself to be in this with you. And so acknowledging our own fear, acknowledging our own triggers, acknowledging our own past and our baggage and what gets stirred up when our kid gets stirred up, and how we can hold that for ourselves and not get dysregulated ourselves when our kids need us the most to be regulated, I think is incredibly important. It's not that we're robots. It's not that we're apathetic. It's not that we're disconnecting from our kids. Quite the opposite. It's that we are doing what we can for ourselves in order to be there for our kids also. And so I think when kids see that our parents can handle it, that our kids, that we're not going to get pulled under with them, I think that helps them a lot, being able to open up and connect because they don't feel guilty or bad about it. Thanks, Abigail, so much for your insight and vulnerability and honesty. And I hope you can drink some water there and start feeling a little bit better.
Thank you.
Yeah. Richele, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over to you. Wow, sometimes organically, we just move along at the right exact minute. Look at that. Richele, I know that you've been in practice for a little bit working with adolescents. I know you've had some experiences in the community as well. And so I would like maybe to frame this discussion coming from a clinician's standpoint, coming from a therapist standpoint, and what you feel kind of works in that relationship with kids, what you feel motivates kids to get over resistance, work through fear, work through struggle. So the first question I'm going to ask you is kind of related to a little bit about motivational interviewing and how we work through fear. So if you're seeing a kiddo therapeutically, what questions may you ask a kid to help them work through fear and resistance?
Yeah, first off, can everyone hear me? Good, okay. Wanted to make sure I wasn't still on mute. I think resistance is a tough one. And Abigail, thank you again so much. That was so wonderful to hear kind of your experience and point of view. I think from a parent, a teacher, a therapist, anyone working with a kid, when you have a kid that's resisting to do something, it can be really frustrating. And I think the first point is to remember is to not take it personally, and to go back, even Andrea, to that quote that you talked about, behind every behavior is a feeling. Kids can do well, or kids can want to do well. They will do well if they can. And sometimes resistance is even framed as, a protection for something. So a defense against whether it be anxiety or trauma or fear or just discomfort, right? And so that also goes back to that lacking skill piece that you were talking about. Like if, I don't have the skill to deal with this anxiety in that moment, so I'm just going to refuse or resist to do something. So when I'm working with a kid that is coming in and there's some sort of refusal, resistance to do something, the first thing I want to do is help them discover what that underlying fear is or what that emotion is that's causing it. And I think that goes back to some basic listening skills. And I think for anyone, I think I saw that there was a grandparent on here listening, or for anyone working with kids, these are things that you can do that you don't have to be a therapist. But I hear so many kids when I'm meeting with them one-on-one saying, I wish my parent, what do you wish most from your parents? And it was, I want to be heard. I want to be understood. I wish they just listened to me. So I wanted to go through a few listening skills and then talk about some questions like the motivational interviewing stuff. So one of the first things is just to create an environment where they feel they can be heard. You want to pay attention to things like body language. We always talk about teens being on their phone a lot, but we want to make sure as adults that if we are talking to our teen, that we're not like distracted by our phone. If our phone's dinging and we're always looking at it, no one feels heard and really listened to if you're not really focused on them. So how are you facing? Are you looking at them? Are you distracted by other things? Empathy and validation is a big one. And I think Abigail mentioned this, you don't have to jump right into problem solving, right? First, people often want to be heard when they're really in an emotional state. So you can reflect feelings. So reflecting a feeling is something like saying, it sounds like you feel really sad about that. And sometimes I think people get nervous about reflecting feelings, but you can reflect exactly what they said back. Or, you can take a stab out there and say, like, it sounds like you feel sad. Oftentimes, if you get it wrong and people don't feel sad, they feel mad or another way, like they let you know. And then you figured out how they feel. Okay, you're mad. You're not sad. Great. And mirroring is another way to do that, which is really just like kind of repeating back what someone says, which sounds really obvious. But if, your teen comes up to you and says, wow, I had a really crappy day, sometimes you can just say back like, wow, you had a really crappy day, huh? And you don't want to do that the whole conversation, but that can also be really validating, and make a person feel really heard. One thing is to ask open-ended questions. So open-ended questions are a term that therapists use a lot. I don't know that people in everyday life use that, but that means asking a question in a way that it can't be answered with yes or no. Did you have a good day? Can be answered yes or no, rather than, what is one good thing that happened today? And then you have to think about like, what is one good thing? One thing that's hurting you, rather than are you upset? That helps people talk a little bit more. Be okay with silence is another one. Sometimes it takes people a few minutes to think about what they're saying, to gather up the courage to say what they want to say. If you just automatically start talking or keep asking questions, then it doesn't give a person really a chance to maybe say something that they wanted to and they were working on how to say that. And be authentic and non-judgmental. I get that this one is non-judgmental is easier to do as a therapist than a parent. But I think teens, anyone can sense if you're not showing up and you're not really truly being authentic, like if you're not, if you're presenting, you're having these judgments, and it can come out in your tone of voice and your body language and the way your next question is phrased. So try to put your judgments aside when you're just trying to connect and listen. At this point, really, what it is hearing from the person what's going on. And I think another big thing is often parents will dismiss a teen's problems because they feel like they're a teen's problem. A breakup, as an adult, you might be like, oh gosh, they're going to go through a million breakups during their life, right? This is just your first of many. And that can feel really invalidating because in their life experience and their life view, and in that moment, this is like real feelings and real things that are happening. So you just want to be really mindful of, making sure that you're validating those emotions and making sure the person's feeling heard, rather than saying, oh, this is, just a breakup, you'll go through many. Again, I think Abigail shared like one thing that was nice was when people are vulnerable, if they want you to be vulnerable, they open up and vulnerable. So as a parent, could you share a time that you experienced some heartbreak, and even think of that, like how hard was that? That was not a thing in the moment that you wanted to brush off, right? So helping people feel heard. And as you're having the conversation, noting what's important, going back to those values that Maria mentioned, and picking those out, and look for discrepancies. So either discrepancies in what's happening, either with the values or what's going on. So if you have a teen that's not getting up to go to school every morning, because I've heard from a lot of people that's been really hard, right? Online classes was a lot easier to just, click in 5 minutes before your class, still wearing your pajamas. I know at the school I was at last year, the day started later and ended earlier. So just even the longer day. So if you're not getting up and going to school, but then during the conversation, you've learned like you want to go to school, like, or you want to do well in school, point out that discrepancy. Like, I hear that you want to do well in school, but right now you aren't getting up and making it to school on time. Is that helping you do well in school? And help figure out what needs are being met by the behavior. It's really important for individuals to find their own self-motivation. So sometimes asking them what the positives are to do, continuing the behavior as they're doing it, and what the negatives are, and what the positives and negatives are to changing. I was working with a team once, and we went over plans after plans, and she had all these things that she was going to do to change the behavior, but nothing was changing. And so we got to this point where it was like, well, what are some positives to changing, and what are negatives to changing this behavior? And that was a very insightful moment for her, because she realized she could list all the positives for changing the behavior, but she couldn't find any negatives. And all of a sudden she found that spark of self-motivation. You can come up with plans all you want, but unless a person is really motivated and ready to make that change, following through with the plans is might not, happen the way we want them to. So I think a big piece of motivational interviewing is finding that self-motivation. Where are you at in wanting to change, and what is it that makes you want to change? And then lastly with that piece is empowering the teens to come up with their own solutions, and trying to get them to come up with their own solutions first.
Richelle, I think you froze.
Or what do you think your friend might, what advice might you give your friend? Am I froze?
Not anymore.
Do you need me to repeat anything?
Maybe just the first part of that we cut out a little bit for your last.
Empowering is that about it? Okay, empowering to come up with their own solutions. So if someone says, I don't know, you can say things like, well, if you did know, or what would you tell a friend, or looking at it kind of from the outside to try to get some solutions. If they really can't come up with anything, you can try to make some suggestions, but it's really important that the individual agrees with those suggestions or those solutions before you agree on a plan. So your solutions, they might say, no, 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 but then that might trigger them. Oh, but this might work. And often, often you can come up with a plan once you've gone through this and they've really felt heard. So when you agree on a plan, agree on something specific and attainable, and then go back and look at it again later. So are you getting up and going to school? No, you're still not getting up and going to school. Okay, let's start this process again. Like, what do you think is going on? What's the motivation to change? What's the need that's being met by not going to school? I think, Andrea, you touched a little bit on the raw screen stuff, but some of the specific ways we do this here at the Wellness Center for Girls is you say a phrase like, I notice you're having trouble with whatever it is, what's up? And then you listen, right? And you use all of those listening, empathetic listening skills. You give them a chance to voice their concerns. You ask, like, I'd like to share my concerns now, and this is what I have, what my concerns are with this, and then come up with solutions together. Again, I can't reiterate enough is having people come up with their own solutions. So those are some of the ways I would go about that.
Yeah, I think, Richelle, you're talking a lot about internal motivation, and that we can suggest things all day long, but until it comes from an internal place, it doesn't matter to them, right? It doesn't matter to them what we want or how we want them to behave or what we want things to look like. It doesn't matter, right? That's not what's going to motivate them to get through resistance and fear.
Rewards can work for like a little bit, but
Yeah.
that doesn't change that internal motivation to make ongoing lasting change.
Exactly. The raw screen stuff, I want to circle back to really quickly. This is really great, because one of the things that I want parents to remember is that one of the things that we want to help our kids with is getting at the unresolved problem and the lagging skill. And so when we say exactly what you said, Richelle, hey, Jane, I noticed you've been having difficulty with blank, what's up? Now you've acknowledged that she's having difficulty with something. You've asked an open-ended question, what's up, without judgment. And you've opened up the discussion, and maybe she'll be able to tell you what's up, and maybe she won't. But when she tells you what's up, this gives us really critical information on how to help, because we don't want to assume that we know what's up. We want to get that information from the kid themselves. And so that gives us data, that gives us clarification. And then I love that we go into, and that Ross Green trained us on this, and that we go into the, what are the kids' concerns? They go first to give them that empowering moment. We're also allowed to have concerns as an adult, and then we can lay out our concerns. And then the third step, the collaborative problem solving, is letting the child go again first. What can you come up with as a solution to this problem? Because if it comes from them, again, the chances of it being effective are much, much greater. But we can't skip the step of empathy and validation, right? So empathy, validation, asking them what's up, laying out their concerns, laying out our concerns, and then going through the problem solving process. I do have a handout on this collaborative problem solving strategy. You can also, again, find it in the livesinthebalance.org website, but we can send these out after the webinar. So Richelle, I'm really, really glad that you brought this up, because this problem solving process hits on a lot of the things that we've talked about, including the adult coming into the conversation regulated and not triggered. So unless we're in our window of tolerance, this is not going to work. If we're hyper aroused or we're hypo aroused, meaning we're hyper, meaning that we are so active that we cannot focus and give them a regulated experience, this is not going to work. Or if we're hypo aroused, meaning we're flat, we're not going to be able to do this easier. So again, we've got to come in as adults, regulated, attuned, and grounded. Richelle, one of the other questions or comments that you had in your notes that I just love is talking about this kind of emotional bank and not being able to kind of withdraw from that bank if the bank isn't full. So you have it down in your notes is you have to have money in the bank before you withdraw. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that for a minute.
Yeah, and so by that bank, Andrea, I mean like that relationship with your child or the child that you're working with. If they're always hearing negatives, don't do this, or get up and do this, or I need this, that doesn't feel like a really reciprocal positive relationship, right? And so you have to remember to build that relationship up before you can do some of that taking it away. And parents absolutely have to set boundaries, and we need to have expectations, but don't forget that positive piece of the relationship. And so that's the putting in the bank before you take it away. And I think you've got to, it goes along with building trust, and trust goes both ways, right? And so if you want your child to trust you, they need to see that you're trusting them. And what are some ways you feel comfortable building that trust? I had put together just a list of a few things that I thought of, or like, what are some things you can do to put money in the bank, right? And it seems like some of these seem like really simple, obvious things, but when life gets really busy and there's extracurricular activities, or someone in the home is struggling and everyone's stressed and there's homework and there's work and all of the things, it can be really hard to come back to kind of the basics, especially the things you might have done when your kids were younger, or that you thought you would do when your kids were older and time just doesn't allow you. So suggestions are just doing things together, right? Show an interest in their interests. Ask them what they're into right now. If they are playing sports, make sure you go to those or watch them together on TV, or ask them about, their favorite sport team and how they're doing. So have fun together. So play games, do family game nights, go to events together. Catch them doing something right. So often we're telling our kids what they're doing wrong, but like, notice when they're doing something right. Create rituals that you guys can do as a family, whether it be movie nights or just going out to coffee on Saturday mornings, just things that can be done regularly with your teen. And one-on-one is really great. And as a group is really great too. But sometimes, if you're with the whole family unit, maybe your team won't feel like sharing as much as if it's a one-on-one situation. Ask them to play their favorite song or artist. I love doing this in therapy because oftentimes so many feelings can come out. Like, what's your favorite song right now? And they play the song and you're like, why do you really like that song? And it's like, oh, because of this. And all of a sudden what's going on, like, starts, coming out. So music is an amazing thing. Ask them to teach you to do something that they can do. They're playing tennis, you don't know how to play tennis, have them go and teach you how to do it. Do chores together. If they have, certain things they have to do around the house, like volunteer to do it with them and help them with once in a while. If they have to sit and do their homework all night and you've got a presentation for work the next day, like, sit beside them so you're both working together. Go for a walk or a drive. Sometimes when you're not face to face with someone, it can make it really easy to open up and talk more. And again, like, ask open-ended questions, but make them, really specific rather than how was your day? Like, ask, who did you eat lunch with? Who did you talk to after lunch? Like, what teacher annoyed you the most? So trying to just open up what's going on. So those are some of my suggestions.
Awesome. Thanks, Richelle. That was fabulous, really practical, really useful, and super insightful. Thank you. It's about 12:50 right now, so I want to make two more quick points, and then I want to open it up for some potential Q&As here. So when we have a teenager on our hands, sometimes we get super fixated on behavior, myself included. I'm a parent as well. So the behavior concerns us, right? We're super focused on the behavior. And what I want you to know is that I want you to think about the behavior as a fever, like your kid has a fever, right? And that's a symptom. So when the behavior is occurring, I know that we don't like it. And I know that it can feel disrespectful and destructive and mean and rude and not aligning with our family values. And it scares us. And we don't want our kids to behave in a way that has all sorts of negative repercussions associated with it. But one of the things that I'm going to ask you to do is to step away from the behavior for the moment and look at and try and get at the underneath feeling and need behind the behavior. So teenagers are going to have all sorts of behaviors, right? And some of them are developmentally appropriate behaviors as they're trying to individuate and grow apart from us, which is completely developmentally appropriate. But sometimes we can get really triggered by the behavior. And sometimes, as to Richelle's point, we need to set a boundary and we need to say, hey, that behavior is not okay. But at the same time, we can look at what is the hurt, what is the need, what is the feeling underneath that behavior. The second thing that I wanted to bring up is that I think somebody in the chat had a question about Lynn Lyons. Lynn Lyons is an anxiety and OCD therapist and expert. She has got a podcast that I listen to a lot. It's really funny, the title. So are you ready for it? It's called Flusterclux. Flusterclux. So she's got a ton of episodes on working directly with a kiddo who is struggling with anxiety. And I will tell you that my two takeaways from that have been is that anxiety loves avoidance and anxiety loves accommodation. So we're going to try and stay away from avoiding anxious topics, experiences. Kids are going to say, I can't do that. I'm too anxious. And one of the biggest powerful things that we can give back to anxiety to say that it's winning is to say, you're right, honey, you can't handle that experience, so we're not going to have you do it. We have to give these kids the tools to be able to step into uncomfortable situations and discomfort. If we don't do that, that anxiety is going to win every time. And we are doing an incredible disservice to our kids. So she goes into a lot of strategies about how we can work with anxiety and how we can step into that fear along with our kids and have them do things, even if it's uncomfortable. And to Maria's point, because it takes away from the value of what they really want to do. So it is about 12:54. If you want to ask any questions to any of us, now would be a great opportunity for you to put that into the chat box.
There was
Or,
a
yeah.
There was a question earlier, Andrea, and I think this was when Richelle was talking more so around the connecting with your kids and teens. So the question was, how can you connect with your kids and teens who say you ask too many questions, and maybe some strategies around that?
Yeah, and I would love if anyone else wants to jump in. My initial thoughts are to work on that relationship and maybe stop asking so many questions and build that relationship. And your teen's probably going to notice that you're not asking as many questions and say something like, why aren't you asking as many questions? And that might be one strategy. Obviously, if it's more of a safety issue, then you can't get around not asking questions. So I do just want to address that too. If you're talking about it in relation to collaborative problem solving. Okay, so if there is a safety concern, I would say you're like, I can't stop asking these questions because I want to make sure you're safe. But if it feels too invasive, like using scales, sometimes for kids that are self-harming or having thoughts of suicide, rather than, where are you at, spill all your feelings, like come up with a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 with them. And then just say, I'm going to ask you, where you're at on this scale every day. That's a really, a way to do some of those safety things. But in addition, more problem solving. And Andrea, I don't know if you want to jump in with that one, since that's a collaborative problem solving question.
Yeah. I think that goes to the Ross Green work, and I'm happy to share that form. I'm really curious about what is it about the question asking that your teenager is finding bothersome? And really to think about that. Is it she's worried about you? Does she think that you're asking a lot of questions because you're scared, because you're worried, because you're not okay? And she doesn't want to take that on. So really getting curious about that is a really interesting point that your kid is bringing up, that why are you asking so many questions? And something about that is not working for them. And so, and I think to Richelle's point, like test yourself and challenge yourself. Like, I'm going to start asking less questions and I'm going to try and get information in an alternate way. Right? So what are some alternate ways that you can get information about what's going on with your kid that would not require you to ask so many questions? And this doesn't mean that you're not connected to your kid. It doesn't mean that you don't want to know about what's going on in their life. But I would look at this from a developmental standpoint. Kids want to know that we're going to be okay. and kids want to know that they are going to be okay. And so maybe the question asking is sending your kid the message, you are not confident enough in them for them to know that they're okay. So my mom or dad must be asking me a lot of questions because they must think that I'm not okay. And so really, I would look at the underlying message as to what that's all about. I think that Richelle hit the nail on the head too, of like challenging yourself to look at your own stuff and what's driving you to ask so many questions. And are you willing to examine that and give up some control around that? That doesn't mean you're giving up on your kid. It doesn't mean you're giving up on the relationship with your kid. It means that you're listening and that you're trying to respond in a better way that may work for your kid. So conscious parenting, right? Conscious parenting. What is it about myself that I'm asking so many questions, right? And so to listen to your kid and to respond in a way that you let her know that you heard her and her desire to have you ask less questions and try and get information another way. Emily, are there any other questions in the chat or that's come up?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay, so here is kind of an overview of the resources that we use today. We used a lot of the handouts that Maria displayed. Those will be coming your way. We talked a lot about the work of Ross Green. He has also written a really good book. The title of the book is Escaping My Mind right now. But if you want a step-by-step narrative process of how to collaboratively problem solve with your kiddo, either reach out to me directly, or you can just go to Amazon and type in Ross Green, and his books will pop up. Great book. I've read it a number of times, and it gives a great strategy and tools for walking your kid through getting more information and helping them sort things out. The third resource that we talked about is the work of Lynn Lyons. She's got that podcast. She's also got a book called Anxious Parents, Anxious Kids, which she lays out a lot of the strategies for working with anxious kids and working through fear and resistance. If there's anything else you need from us, we're always here. We're always here as a resource to help you navigate with information, community resources, therapists, support groups for teens, DBT groups for teens. We've got all the resources here. So if you ever need help in navigating that system, or you know someone who does, they can always reach out to me, no problem. We deeply appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Richelle. Thank you, Abigail. And thank you, Emily. And I look forward to continuing a connection with all of you. And I hope that everybody got some practical knowledge, skills, and information. And I hope that you have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks again. Bye, everybody.
All set. Great.
Thanks, everybody. You did such a good job, and I really deeply appreciate your help. How did it feel? Do we feel like it went pretty well?
It was great. I appreciated everyone's perspective.
Yeah.
There was a lot of great feedback in the chat too, just thanking a couple of the participants. So I did put all the links that you guys were referring to, and I saved them. So in the notes that I send out in the next day or two, I'll include sort of some of the podcast references and links to books and things like that, which will be helpful.
Awesome. How many people were there, Emily? Was it 6, 7?
I think it was 7.
Okay. It's so interesting because how many signed up?
19.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, we will get the recorded version and the notes out to people. Again, Abigail and Maria, thank you so much for your time.